All right, today I'm going to talk to you for quite a bit of time about coding agents, specifically OMP, as it's the agent I've used and spend a ton of time configuring. The goal of this video is I've got many colleagues and friends who feel a little bit behind on the AI train, and they've recently started picking up different coding agents, and I think they're struggling to fully comprehend, make the jump between just using a chat interface and having a fully autonomous agent. So my goal of this video is to describe what a coding agent does, what its purpose is. I'm going to go through all the settings I use on OMP and attempt to justify them, though it's fairly complicated. I'm sure I'll get a few things wrong, and then just come up with but explain some of my context strategies, how I use it, etc. So first off, quick brief on OMP. So OMP stands for Oh My Pi. It's a coding agent maintained by a cybersecurity guy. It's a fork of Pi, which is a giant open source, very simple, very well-regarded coding model. OMP is I think it kind of takes the kind of central plumbing and replace it with Rust and Beyond to try and make it a little bit more faster and consistent. That's the theory. And adds a bunch of features included, whereas Pi, you have to individually install extensions and test them yourself. So this is a bit more of a get up and go with good default settings version of Pi. I won't go through that. I'm just going to jump right into it. So first of all, this might look scary to some people. Hopefully most people viewing this sees this as the terminal window. The stuff on the left here, this is called Herder. This is for managing multiple agent sessions. It's out of scope of this video, but just so you're aware what this is. So I'm going to clear this by hitting Control-C twice. You'll see I'm on my temp directory, and I'm just going to run Oh My Pi. I know, initially it seems like almost nothing happens, but if you look at the top here, there's a status bar. This is a simple status bar with a pi there that's showing that this terminal is now my OMP coding agent. It gives you some info, sort of what model is currently selected. Opus 5 on high is my default. What directory I'm in, I'm in the temp directory, and it's giving me how much context is used or will be used after I put the first prompt in. Now you'll notice it's not starting at 0, it's starting at 2.1%. That's due to the system prompt and skills and plugins, all of which we will get to. So before I even continue here, I'm going to go into settings and talk to you through OMP. So if I quickly click through this, there's a huge number of settings. I'm going to blitz through these and try and call out important ones. Perhaps before I do this, I should talk a bit more about what these settings do. So I've told you that a coding agent isn't just a chatbot. It's more of what people are calling a harness. Now, harness is kind of a new term. If you don't know what it means, a harness kind of has three jobs. Its job is to control what model is being used, the tools it can use, and then it also controls the context, which is the most complicated one. Context includes session history, memory, things like that. This is a bit more specific coding agent, so it also has things like LSP edits, sub-agents. So, a agent can decide to give a task to a, faster running agent when maximum thinking isn't required and you want speed, all of that sort of thing. So when I run through here, this first page, this is all visual stuff. I reckon you can leave this all as default. I'm not going to go through it. This is more interesting. Model. So you've got the thinking section here. So hopefully you're aware that models have different thinking levels. And you have the option of switching on, being able to see their thinking. Now, this is useful to actually get used to a model. And we'll see models behave differently and think differently. Like I've been using GLM 5.2. That uses a lot of chain of thought reasoning and with huge thinking blocks. If you switch to a different model, you'll see different thinking styles, and it gets you used to the model. But once you're in the flow of actually getting things done. Seeing it gets in the way, so I recommend having thinking blocks, hiding the thinking blocks. Thinking level default is high. You can also switch this to auto. Some providers have good auto, some do not. Auto basically means when you put a prompt in, there's a fast LLM that will classify how much effort is needed for that prompt and then select the thinking based on that. But I prefer to have the control that's set to high. Pros only thinking, so this just replaces kind of thinking summaries with ellipses, as the description says. Omit thinking summaries, it's false, so that summarizes the thinking rather than seeing the full blocks. Loop guard, so OMP has several different features here, which basically means sometimes a model will get stuck thinking through something and then doing it again and again and again. And we have these loop guards in, leave those on. Same with tool calling. If a model or if OMP sees a model using the same tool, I think it's 5 times in a row, it will suspect something is off and intervene and try and steer. You'll hear me use this word a few times, steer the model back into what it should be doing. So sampling, temperature, this is complicated. Model -1 is default, basically. Leave it there unless you really know what you're doing with the model you're using. I'm going to skip this one because I actually don't know what it does. Service tiers. If for some reason you're a lucky person that has a higher level of service with one of these, you can switch this on and essentially the model will have a higher flops. It will just run quicker. Prompts, small role storage global. Leave as is. Inline tool descriptors. I'm actually not sure what this is. I thought this was a Gemini based thing. Leave it as default. Include model in the prompt true. Include workspace tree false. This can be useful when working with code bases, but you don't always want it. Personality, OMP comes with a few different personalities. I like the default. Retry and fallback, so how many times OMP will retry something before giving up. This is a bit complicated. I would leave everything as default. Advisor. This is a big thing I'll get back to, but OMP has the option of enabling an advisor where you enable a second model to look at the tool outputs and your prompt to essentially watch another model and intervene if it thinks it's going off course. So this obviously consumes more tokens. However, if you're doing sensitive work on your code base or you're doing something where you want something to be absolutely correct, this is really valuable. Pre-walk. Pre-walk's an interesting concept. It's, yeah, you probably, hopefully know at this point, models assign things to sub-agents. Often the sub-agents are lesser models. And this basically causes the smarter model to write the first turn of the lesser model, which kind of is a way of steering it and making sure it starts on the right path so that that lesser model won't start doing the wrong thing and misinterpret the intent of a prompt. And vision just means you enable describing images from text. Sometimes, yeah, it's useful to have on. You don't have to use it, but it does take a lot of tokens. Interaction, steering mode. When you queue a message while the agent is working, does it interrupt? I have it set to 1 at a time, which means it will not interrupt. Sorry, I'm talking about the interrupt mode here. And yeah, 1 at a time means if you queue multiple things to steer the model will take these as individual turns rather than linking them together. Follow-up mode, same thing. So loop mode. So if you type in -loop, OMP has a thing where it will continually work towards that goal. And over so many iterations, leave this as is. I actually don't know what the other options are. Yeah, prompt. That seems sensible. Session tree filter. Don't know what this does. Leave this default. Autocomplete icons. This is just a visibility thing. I'll leave it at 7. I'm going to go through here. Tool approval. YOLO with no policies. It's not entirely true. I'll show you later. I'm going to go through all this. This is all on default. But speech to tech exists. Collab. So Collab's an option to send your session to a server so you can view it in the browser. OMP is default. I'm not comfortable relying on third-party hardware to host this sort of thing, so I've set up my own. But that's probably beyond relevant scope. Magic keywords. So this is a big thing that I will try and demonstrate anyway, but basically if you say any of these three words, ultrathink, orchestrate, or workflow, I think it might be workflow Z, I'll test that in a second, it causes the model to inject, or causes OMP to inject some context that greatly changes the model's behavior. So ultrathink is just work really, really hard. You're probably familiar with that from Claude Code. Orchestrate basically pushes the OMP to delegate more. So if you are giving it a prompt you think would benefit from having multiple subagents, you can use orchestrate. And workflow is sort of an extreme version of this, where it doesn't just push the model to have multiple subagents. It tells the model to come up with a programmatic way of breaking up whatever task it has into subagents and setting them all off at once. There are times when you need to, do a bunch of things in parallel. This is really useful. Quiet startup just takes away some noise when you start up. Auto resume, it's not worth it in my opinion. I would just leave all of this on default. Git integration you definitely want. I'm going to jump over to context, branch summary. I would leave all of this in default. I think something worth talking about is the compaction strategy. So basically, our model only has so much context. As the context fills up, the model tends to have less and less good behavior. So at a certain point, you want to compact, tell the model to strip itself of all of its context and continue on the task just with what it needs. So the compaction strategy I've selected here as the default is handoff, where when I tell it to compact, it will try and create a document for the new model to continue on with just with the absolute minimal it needs to know, and not a traditional compaction, which summarizes everything that happens just in a more minimal way. And I set the threshold to 70%. This can also be lower, but it gets funky when you use things like codex models, which already have the context threshold reduced. So right now it's at 70, but not ideal. I'm going to go through all of these TTSR rules. Worth having, I will show you one. This basically means time traveling something, stream rules. So basically, there's a bit of code watching the output of the LLM. If it ever matches something, I have TTSR rules for SSH and sudo commands. It will immediately cut off the model and interject context to steer the model towards handling that specific thing in the way you want. So, I would leave that on. Some experimental stuff, snap compact system prompt. Snap compact is something OMP uses. It takes texts and puts it into a bit image, which is it's a more efficient way of using context without too much loss. It's still a bit too experimental for me. Jumping to memory. This just means every directory will keep a little bit of memory. There's different strategies for this. I use local, which is just markdown files. So a bit of memory is kept, but there's some more advanced ones. Vectorized databases, technically probably better, but then you can't read it. And then I think the other one is actually a offsite, more in-depth thing. Wouldn't recommend that just for coding and basic use cases. Editing is a really big one you need to understand. So when you're asking your model to do things, it will go away and it will edit files. Now, there are different editing tools. You've got hashline, patch, replace, and apply patch. So I think patch is the default for Claude Code and most coding agents. OMP has one called hashline, where every single line in a text or a code document has a very minimal, it's like a 3 byte hash taken of it. And it's just a way of detecting if a line was edited what before it makes a change, so you don't get the scenario of two things trying to change the document at once and ending up with a either corrupt or incorrect thing. I think lesser models aren't good at using hashline. It's not clear in the settings, but I think OMP does profile models and lesser models do auto get pushed onto using patch editing. So I think it's fine to keep this on hashline and not worry about it too much. I'm getting tired going through the settings, so I'll talk about LSP. If you're an IDE editor, you know what an LSP does. An LSP basically looks at your code and makes sure syntax is correct as part of the language. I've enabled some settings to kind of, help the LSP guide when code's being interacted with. Shell, you want to use bash. I can't imagine what else you would use. Leave these as defaults. The evaluators. So OMP comes in with some evaluators. I think you've got 4 here: Python, JavaScript, Ruby, and Julia. Your models love to write bash, but they like to write Python a lot. And one of the issues with Python, if you've ever worked with it, is every single Python environment is different. OMP comes with built-in Python and JavaScript kind of runtime environments, so that it executes, in a way that the model and OMP will be able to handle, and it also visualizes it nicely. I've also enabled Julia. The model almost never selects this by itself, but it's useful for data analytics. And you can select the exact binary of Python, Ruby, or Julia you want to use, but no need to do that. Tools. So, God, there's just so many settings. Mostly keep these as defaults. If you use GitHub, switch it on. If you use Obsidian, switch it on. You could have a whole video on tools. I think I'm gonna admit it, but basically, your harness, when you start using a model within a harness, it's gonna report to the model all the tools that can be used. The more of these you turn on, the more context it uses, but then your agent has more options of tools it can use. So the most common tool it's probably going to be using is things like bash and read, but it will also be using edit. It will also be browsing, doing web searches, and a whole bunch of other things like setting itself to-do lists, etc., etc. MPC, I actually tend to disable a lot of the MPC stuff. I don't like MPC, but I'm going to be using MPC. I prefer it to be a CLI. I'd rather just install a CLI-based tool, but you can look at that. This is just auto QAing. So if you hit something you don't like, you can just immediately kind of put a grievance in there that will be triaged. Tasks, so plan mode, goal mode. Goal mode's a built-in thing. I suggest enabling it. It seems pretty good. Plan mode we'll go over in a second. Providers, a lot of these will be for web searching, text-to-speech, things like this. One thing I will talk about here is a tiny model. I would enable one of these. So a tiny model is a CPU-based, very tiny LLM that does things like it will name your sessions. I will show you when we start using the tool. It's useful to have a tiny kind of classifier model enabled. And plugins. I am using plugins, but no third-party NPM one, so you don't see it. All right, so we're in OMP, and I'm just going to show you what happens. So I'm just going to prompt it with test. Now, immediately, we've got a bunch of things happening. I'll go through this step by step. First thing that happened, you saw this, environmental context. This is a plugin I have. Whenever I use OMP, I want it to know the environment I'm in. So that means host, because I use Nix and I have different hosts, all using the same mono repo, so it needs to know what flakes to use, what shell it's been using, what multiplexer it's in. So right now it's herder inside Wes terminal. That's useful if it needs to spawn additional panes to, it can't run sudo commands, so it spawns separate panes for me to click enter in, what workspace it's in, etc. So this is a custom plugin just providing context to steer the model's behavior. Again, that's what these harnesses are there for. They're to steer the model. They've got so many tools to help do that. Another thing you saw happen is I tried to use Opus 5 and I'm out of credits, so it auto fell back to ChatGPT. This is something that can be configured. Another thing you saw it do is it read the local memory file. Yeah, so memory file of what's been worked on from this directory in the past. And then you see this is the model's output back. It's just saying test received. And now you can see that even though we started in Opus 5, we're now using GPT 5.6 on Medium because of that, because we fell back. So how did that fallback work? How did I select my models? That's dash models. So there's a huge number of slash commands. And again, I'm sorry, there's more settings. So OMP comes with built-in roles. I think there's 7. I've got a few more roles in here. And this is, I think I will go through this quickly because it's important, but you can find guidance on the Discord. But default model, what's what you default into? SMOL is basically a small model. You want something smaller, faster, but not totally dumb in here. Slow model is for planning. Vision model is for interpreting images. And model, again, for planning. I actually don't know why these two are split. A designer model, again, for planning. A commit model, so when you make commits, what model? Just do that. Tiny model, a task model, so when there's small things to be done that get allocated. You have your advisor model, so again, this is the model that if you have advisor mode switched on, we'll be reading tool outputs and your inputs and steering, attempting to steer the model, and then you can have custom ones. And you can also set fallbacks if you see I have for most. I'm not going to go fully through this, and again, you can see all the different providers you can connect into, local models, all that stuff. So I'm going to start to do a few things. So if I just mentioned advisors, let's switch advisor enabled, and then let's ask the model to do something complicated and see if the advisor kicks in. Like find all of my Rust projects. And again, it's letting me know that it's falling back. And we will see the advisor. This is actually a simple task. The advisor may not have a reason to kick in here. But as you can see, it's using glob. So glob is a tool provided to the agent. It's using read. Glob is similar to grep, but with it's a bit more of a fuzzy output. And here you go. It's the agent's working, and the advisor's jumped in with a concern. So a concern won't block the model. It just steers it towards what it should be doing. So it says a single matching line does not establish all projects. Make sure the search includes hidden, get ignored directories and deeper nesting. So basically the advisors kind of basically stopping the default model from being lazy and making sure it puts adequate work into the task. And there we go, it's completed the task. It's found all my Rust projects. I think this is actually mostly correct. But you got to see advisor in action, gently steering. Again, if the advisor really doesn't like what the main coding agent is doing, it can actually cut off the session and kind of try and hard reset the model into what it's doing. It's a nice feature of OMP for when you're doing sensitive work. I'm going to switch the advisor off again. Again, that's dash advisor. I should talk. If you see slash, if you type slash, a bunch of things come up, and that will show you all the skills that are currently loaded. I don't have too many. Things like plan review. These are, these should be fairly familiar to people. Vibe and goal. So these are things, God, there's just so much. You can't do one video going through a coding agent. Vibe mode, an OMP thing that you put it in a mode where it essentially you have one orchestrating model just only with the tools to hand off to other models. So it's a way when if you want to spend a lot of tokens and have a lot of parallel agents. Goal is when, rather than planning something step by step, you have an end goal in mind. You can clearly articulate. You can use goal and guided goal. guide goal will just interview you. So you state your goal and it asks questions. So it builds up an understanding of what you want before going into goal mode. And then it will, your agent will work autonomously. That's the hard word to reach that goal. Loop mode is pretty self-explanatory. You put it in the loop. You give it a goal, similar to goal mode, but it's often something where you cycle around. So this might be, self-improvement of, open code, something like that. Okay, pre-walk I've talked about. That's the writing the first turn of a lesser agent. Advisor we've talked about. Exporting the session and dumping the session. So sharing the session by encrypted link. And collab, again, is remote access via browser. Only use this if you have configured it or you're happy with OMP infrastructure to see your sessions. Joining that. To do sets, to do items, the model has a tool to set this itself. Usually you do that. Session gives you session information. Another useful one is usage. Oh, that was pause. Let's do usage to show you how many credits you have where. And I don't have to cut this up. There's just so much in these agents. I need to come up with a more concise video. Yeah, another thing about OMP is it has its own way of managing SSH sessions. So if it SSHs somewhere and it's got a known key and a no place that key will work, it maps that out locally. Just be aware. Starts a new session. There's things like tree, so you can see all the turns taken in a session. So assistant, advisor, user. Obviously, you're the user, and everything else is tool reads. An advisor is a third-party agent advising. If you have sub-agents, you might see sub-agent outputs reporting back to the main agent in here. Things like this. All right, so the stuff I haven't covered. I think it's worth noting that one of the things you may want to do is switch what model you're using. You've got different ways of doing that. Control-P is a quick switch. And then you also have Alt-P will bring down a drop list of recently used models. Obviously, these days you have a lot of models from a lot of providers. One thing I think I want to take some time is looking at the OMP configuration directory. So OMP has a .dot file. You shouldn't need to modify this too much, but for things like editing the let me go to the root here. You may want to edit your systemdb. So that's in agents. It's in, I will find it looking for it, instructions. So this is obviously giving exact guidance to the model on how you want it to use your system, not to the model, to your harness. And just looking at this gives you an idea of what it's doing. So obviously it keeps track of terminal sessions, keeps track of rules. So you can see I've got rules for like sudo and SSH enforcement, making sure it doesn't use certain commands and enforces the use of certain rebuild commands on my system so it doesn't incorrectly break something. You then also have skills. So I try and keep this pruned as much as possible. Another feature of OMP is you can have workspace-based skills, which is what I try to do. So I'm going to split this. And if I go to something like here, you see it has its own .omp file with its own agents file, its own rules, and things like this. So, and you can even have, your localized skills as well. So this is a way of, there you go, a skills folder. So I'm using this as an example because this is a pen testing framework. It requires a huge number of custom skills. And I don't want those to be sitting in my harness all the time. So if I cd down to that directory, so let's do that. Let's kill this. If we go to that, and then I was to start OMP locally, go into and start looking at skills, you will see things like AD security. This is only appearing because I'm in that directory. So this is a way of keeping context, as skills take context, as low as possible, and also making sure skills you don't want to load in, like pen testing skills, load in when you're doing other pieces of work. So the skills that you have all the time should be general skills that you always want. And then I would suggest breaking things out more generally. And you'll see if I go up a directory here and list it, I've got things like, I think I've got a research thing. This is a bunch of different research skills. So, which I don't need all the time for when I'm just doing coding work, but is useful there. I think I also have one called lab, which basically has a bunch of skills for how the agent interacts with my home lab. So it can help me on projects rebuilding stuff, but I don't want it to have that knowledge when I'm doing other types of work. All right, I'm going to pause again and figure out where I'm going for the next segment of the video. I think I'm going to leave it there. This was a slightly unstructured video. The idea is just to go through what a harness is, what it's used for, and all the various options you can explore, giving you some confidence to go through and set it up the way you like it. It takes a huge amount of experimenting to get all of this stuff looking the way you want. Setting up providers, because in these days it's not just AI providers, but then you have to select sub-agents, you have to select what research tools you want it to use, what web search providers, what Git search providers. And it is, mastering these coding agents is a huge amount of time and effort. And I would say it is absolutely something you need to do. You don't necessarily have to use an in-terminal one like this, but it does seem like the best regarded ones are internal ones. I would recommend going down that route. If you don't like it, OpenCode and Goose, both open source frameworks that have some good GUI options. But anyway, I'm going to call the video here. Hopefully this hits the people I want it to. That makes sense to them. But if not, then you probably didn't make it this far. So there we go.